Welcome back. Do voters want change? A new poll from Abacus Data shows the answer for about 8 out of 10 Canadians is a resounding yes. The poll, conducted last week, shows 81% of Canadians think it's time for a change in government. 20% believe Justin Trudeau and the Liberals should be re-elected. But here's the kicker. Among the 81% who want change, a full third of those surveyed say there isn't a good alternative to the Liberals they're comfortable with. Here to unpack the consequences of that for both the governing and opposition parties is the front bench: Sabrina Grover, Gary Mar, Garatan Singh, and Marika Walsh. Sabrina, if you're sitting there and I just kind of want to go through the parties. If you're the Liberals and you see that top line headline, right, the idea that 8 out of 10 Canadians, 81% of those surveyed, actually are okay with the idea that it's time for a change in government. What is your main takeaway from that?
I think my main takeaway from that, from a Liberal perspective, is what does that kind of change mean? And I think digging into that poll a little bit, where you talk about that 31% that isn't happy with any of the alternatives, I think it means that there's a change maybe in the way that the Liberals are telling their story and in the way that the policies which have been benefiting Canadians increasingly, especially Canadians in the middle class and pulling Canadians out of poverty, how do we tell that story better so that the change that Canadians are desiring is the change that's being reflected in what they're hearing in policies, what they're hearing in news, what they're hearing in the media. I think to me that's what that really reflects, because it's more about more than just about the headline. It's about kind of digging deeper. And I think that the ability to be able to interact with that number and interact with what does that change look like is important. And I think we talked about it in the last segment a little bit. Sometimes a cabinet shuffle is part of that change, and sometimes resetting the mandate or resetting priorities is part of that change. So I don't think it stops the Liberals in their tracks and scares them out of government in any way. I think it's more about how they tell the story and what that means for them.
Gary, do you think it's a communications thing? Do they need to be better at telling the story of what they're already doing? Or do you think 8 years in, they need to present a new or renewed agenda to Canadians?
I think, every government has a certain lifespan to it. And it's an old adage that oppositions don't win governments, or oppositions don't win elections. It's governments that lose elections. And I think that there's maybe some exhaustion coming in and some freshness and a change of pace is needed. I don't think it's merely a communications issue on the part of the federal Liberals. I think that there are some competency issues that need to be addressed. But, if you were Pierre Poilievre, you would look at this poll and say, we got some work to do as well. Like the Edmonton Oilers, I'd say, don't peak too soon. So you got work to do between now and the next election to make sure that you actually look like a leader and that you look like somebody that is a government in waiting. That would be the advice that I think Pierre Poilievre's getting. But I don't think it's just a communications issue. It's not that the Liberal government has done everything bad, but there is a certain exhaustion when the Prime Minister's been at it for as many years as he had, the last 8 years, just as there was exhaustion with Stephen Harper, when he'd been around, and that was the difference in 2015.
I found this poll pretty interesting because I feel, Garatan, it sort of quantified a sentiment that you get when you talk about politics with people, right, who maybe aren't necessarily in politics but are paying attention a bit to it. And that is, okay, I'm tired of what's happening right now, but I'm just not sure about the other guys. And I'm wondering if you are the other guys, so members of the opposition or leaders of the opposition, what your takeaway from this is. If you know that people are willing to look elsewhere but are not yet comfortable looking at you, what do you internalize there?
I think that's a great question. I think actually this poll presents a really interesting opportunity for the NDP. So we know that Canadians want a change. We know that that's clear with the data that's put forward. But does that change mean just going back to the Conservatives and this the flip of the coin, one couple of terms is Liberals, couple of terms are Conservative? If we look at the data as well, Mr. Kapelos recently, I think earlier today, tweeted that if we look at popularity by leaders, Jagmeet Singh, my brother, I love the guy. I'm biased. He's the most popular at home, but the data backs it up. He's in Canada still the most popular leader in the country. And so when we're in this position, where we know people want change. We have this incredibly popular leader, not just as a brother, but as someone who's reading the data presented by Mr. Kapelos, it presents a really interesting opportunity when we combine that with the fact that we know that the NDP has pushed the Liberals to bring in universal dental care, the largest expansion of healthcare since its inception, putting down the framework for farmer care, doubling down the GST rebate, helping with childcare. I think this presents a really amazing opportunity for the NDP to present themselves now as that alternative to those who now are looking for so much change and saying that you can get that change, better change, with the NDP.
Here's the caveat I'll add with the greatest of respect to Garajan and his family. Mr. Singh has long been a popular leader among the crop of leaders who have run in the past, in the two elections that he has. He has not been able to translate that to the kind of electoral wins that a party with that kind of a leader who has that kind of popularity would hope to. What is the disconnect there, and what do you think the NDP should take away, Marika, from something like this?
Well, the disconnect actually still speaks to why they have this confidence and supply deal now. I think that Mr. Singh has struggled in campaigns to go beyond likable to be seen to be governable, or to be seen as somebody who can be government, who can be the prime minister. The NDP has acknowledged that, addressed that, and said that in this deal to prop up the Liberals, they're showing governing credibility. I'm not sure that that actually translates to Canadians. The NDP say they acknowledge they have a communications challenge ahead of them to show Canadians that they're the ones who are leading some of these things, like the GST rebate, like the dental care. But when you see the Prime Minister taking credit for those things in ads, it's hard to see how the average Canadian is going to pay attention to those nuts and bolts of it. And in past elections, when the NDP have propped up a government, either through an official agreement or just, by general votes, they don't usually do well right away. And so it's not clear to me that the policy will translate directly to a political win in the next election.
There is some opportunity for really all the opposition parties, and I'll tell you why. Among the 31%, this is another line, Sabrina, in the polling, the 31% who want change, but they're not too comfortable with the options, 33% would vote Liberal, 22% NDP, 19% Conservative, and 14% for the Bloc. So the NDP and the Conservative, they're both have, some ground to gain.
I think one of the things that's important with this poll, and I think maybe polling in general, is really diving deep into the difference between urban and rural areas, and looking into the vote-rich areas, right? So, and we saw this just happen in the Alberta election recently. You saw polling quite tight, but at the end of the day, you saw the progressive vote come out in urban areas. And for the Liberals, I think that is what is the most important in this kind of context, is that in those vote-rich areas, in urban areas, in the places where there are the most number of seats, the Liberals are still more likely to take those votes and take those communities. Pierre Poilievre is unpopular with women. He's still unpopular in city centers. And even in those rural areas where he's, maybe pretending to be a little bit more like a worker on the ground, which little evidence of that exists, he's still not really that popular. And so whether there is room to grow, I think there is, but it kind of depends on who the NDP and the Conservatives are going after, because right now there's no evidence that either of them are going after a new population of the vote.
Gary, Sabrina has a point in that some of this polling shows, I believe, that Pierre Poilievre's negative and positive impressions have increased over time. What do you think his biggest challenge is? Because I don't want to downplay the fact, 80% of people polled say they want to change the government. That's not a small number, so I don't want to downplay that, but his negatives are high. So what's the challenge for him in your view?
Well, he's got to look like he's prepared to be a prime minister in waiting, and there's lots of time for him to do that. The reference was made to the Alberta election, and I'd say the same thing for a Canadian election. The campaign will matter, and how each leader presents himself, in this case, the three leaders of the three major parties, will make a difference as to what the outcome is. And so there will be lots of time for all three party leaders to sort of think about what is the presentation going to be in the next coming election, and what do we want to make the ballot question to be. And certain ballot questions will lend themselves more to a Liberal or an NDP vote. Some ballot questions will lend themselves more to a Conservative vote. And so the campaign will matter. This poll is an interesting snapshot in time for now, but we're a long ways from an election.
Yeah, that's what polls are, right? They just tell us what people are feeling in the moment, but interesting nonetheless. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much to our front bench panel, Gary Marr, Sabrina Grover, Guratan Singh, and Marie